Most English learners think they need more vocabulary, more grammar, more courses, but honestly, that's usually not the real problem. The real problem is something much more invisible. You accidentally trained your brain to understand English passively, instead of using it naturally in real conversations, and that changes everything. Because now, you can understand English perfectly when you're alone. You understand YouTube videos, podcasts, subtitles, even this video right now. But the second a real person suddenly speaks to you, your brain freezes, your thoughts disappear, simple words become difficult, and suddenly you feel like your English disappeared. Hello, my amazing students. Welcome back again to your channel, Native Flow. Today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest hidden mistakes English learners make. A mistake that quietly keeps people stuck for years without realizing it. And honestly, once you understand this mistake, your entire way of learning English may completely change, because fluent people do not simply study harder. They train differently. And the difference is much deeper than grammar. Before we continue, I just want to say, if you've been following Native Flow for a long time, trust me, something special is coming for the real students of this channel. And honestly, this may become one of the biggest things we've built together. Most learners spend years training English in ways that feel productive, but do almost nothing to prepare them for real communication. And honestly, that realization can feel frustrating at first. Hello again, my best students. And let's continue. Think about how most people study English. They memorize vocabulary lists, read grammar explanations, watch lessons passively, repeat exercises quietly inside their head. And while doing all this, they often feel like they are improving. But then something strange happens. A real conversation begins. And suddenly their brain feels completely different. Everything becomes faster, messier, more emotional, and the learner freezes. Now here's the important question. Why does this happen? Because understanding English alone is not the same skill as using English socially. Those are actually two different types of training. One is passive recognition. The other is active communication. And many learners accidentally spend years strengthening only the first one. Now imagine someone who watches fitness videos every day, but never actually exercises physically. They may understand exercise theory perfectly, but their body still lacks real-world training. English works similarly. Many learners consume English constantly, without training the pressure, speed, and emotional reality of communication itself. Now, honestly, this is where many people get trapped, because passive learning feels comfortable, very comfortable. Watching videos, reading subtitles, studying quietly. These activities feel safe because there is no pressure, no risk, no embarrassment. But real conversations are different. Conversations require speed, reaction, listening, emotion, confidence, and unpredictability. And if the brain never trains those conditions, it panics when they suddenly appear in real life. Now let's imagine a very common situation. A learner watches English content every day for years. They understand almost everything. But then someone asks them a simple question in English. So, what do you do for work? And suddenly, the learner's brain goes blank. Not because they lack vocabulary, not because they are unintelligent, but because their brain was trained mostly for recognition, not spontaneous production. That's a huge difference. Now, here's something fascinating about the brain. The brain adapts specifically to the type of training it receives. If you mostly train silent understanding, your brain becomes good at silent understanding. If you train real interaction, your brain slowly becomes comfortable with interaction. And honestly, this changes the entire learning process emotionally. because many learners think, I need more knowledge. But often, they already know much more English than they realize. The real issue is that their brain has not practiced retrieving language under real conditions. Now think about how children learn languages naturally. They do not first memorize thousands of grammar rules before speaking. They interact, they react, they experiment, they make mistakes publicly, and slowly communication becomes automatic through repetition and emotional exposure. Adults often try to avoid this uncomfortable stage completely, and that avoidance quietly blocks fluency. Now let's talk about emotional pressure, because communication is emotional. When speaking with real people, the brain feels social pressure immediately. Fear of judgment, fear of silence, fear of misunderstanding. And under pressure, the brain behaves differently. Even native speakers sometimes lose words under stress. So learners should stop interpreting nervousness as proof of failure. Nervousness is often simply lack of exposure. Now imagine someone who never enters swimming pools. They study swimming techniques online for years. Would they feel comfortable suddenly jumping into deep water? Probably not. Not because they are incapable, but because the body was never trained inside real conditions. Conversations work the same way. Fluency is not only intellectual knowledge, it is nervous system training. Now here's another hidden mistake many learners make. They pause English whenever it becomes emotionally uncomfortable. If listening feels difficult, they stop. If speaking feels awkward, they avoid it. If conversations create anxiety, they escape back into passive learning. And slowly, comfort zones become stronger than growth. Now, honestly, this is why many learners remain stuck for years while still studying constantly, because the training itself never changes. Now, imagine another learner. This person still studies grammar and vocabulary, but also trains interaction, shadowing, speaking aloud, answering questions spontaneously, voice messages, small conversations, reaction training. At first, it feels uncomfortable, slow, messy. But slowly, something important happens. The brain stops panicking during real interaction. Why? Because interaction no longer feels unfamiliar. Now, here's something deeply important. Fluent speakers are not necessarily people with perfect English. Often, they are simply people whose brain became comfortable operating inside imperfect communication. That changes everything emotionally. Because suddenly, the goal is no longer speak perfectly. The goal becomes stay relaxed while communicating. And honestly, relaxed communication sounds much more fluent naturally. Now let's go deeper into reaction speed. Many learners translate everything internally before speaking. English enters. Their native language appears mentally. Then they search for English again. This process creates delay. And under pressure, the delay becomes even worse. But fluent speakers often train patterns directly, not translation, reaction. This is why immersion matters so much. The brain slowly learns to respond automatically instead of analyzing every sentence consciously. Now think about how exhausting constant translation feels emotionally. No wonder many learners become tired during conversations. Their brain is doing too many steps at once. But through repetition and real interaction, the process slowly simplifies naturally. Now here's another truth many learners need to hear. You do not become fluent by avoiding uncomfortable communication. You become fluent by surviving it repeatedly. That survival teaches the brain, this situation is safe. And once the brain stops associating English with panic, fluency grows much faster. Now, honestly, this is why some learners improve dramatically after travel, voice calls, or real social interaction. Not because they suddenly learned magical vocabulary overnight, but because their training environment finally changed. The brain adapted to communication itself. And communication is what fluency was always meant for in the first place. One of the biggest reasons many learners stay stuck for years is surprisingly simple. They confuse studying English with training communication. And honestly, those are not always the same thing. Hello again, my amazing students. And let's continue. Schools often teach English in a very controlled environment. Grammar exercises, vocabulary tests, reading passages, multiple choice questions. And while these things can help build knowledge, they often fail to prepare learners for real human interaction. Because real conversations are messy. People interrupt each other, speak quickly, change topics suddenly, use emotions, use slang, forget words, laugh, react. And honestly, no grammar worksheet truly prepares the brain for that emotional reality. Now think about this carefully. Many learners spent years studying English in school. Some even received good grades. But later, when speaking with a real person, they suddenly feel helpless. That experience creates confusion because internally they think, I studied English for years, so why do I still freeze? The answer is painful sometimes because the brain was trained mostly to pass tests, not communicate naturally. Now here's something interesting. The brain becomes efficient at whatever it repeatedly practices. If you repeatedly practice choosing answers from a list, your brain becomes good at recognition. If you repeatedly practice translating silently, your brain becomes good at mental translation. But fluent communication requires something else entirely, real-time response. And many learners simply do not train that skill enough. Now let's talk about passive learning addiction, because honestly, passive learning can feel very satisfying emotionally. Watching another English video, reading another explanation, saving another vocabulary list. These activities create the feeling of productivity, and sometimes they genuinely help. But passive learning becomes dangerous when it completely replaces active practice. Now imagine someone watching cooking videos every day for years, but never entering the kitchen. Would they eventually become a confident cook? Probably not, because observation alone does not fully train execution. English works similarly. You cannot build speaking confidence only through observation. At some point, the brain must experience communication itself. Now here's something many learners secretly avoid: silence during conversation. Those small moments when the brain searches for words. People fear those moments deeply. Why? Because silence feels emotionally uncomfortable. But fluent speakers are not fluent because they never pause. They are fluent because pauses no longer emotionally destroy them. That's a huge difference. Now imagine two learners during a conversation. The first pauses for 2 seconds and immediately panics internally. The second pauses calmly, thinks, then continues naturally. Which one sounds more confident? Usually the second. And honestly, this calmness comes through exposure, not perfection. Now let's go deeper into comfort zones. Comfort zones feel safe emotionally. Watching English quietly alone feels comfortable, but comfort often creates illusion instead of growth, because the brain changes most when slightly challenged, not overwhelmed, not completely comfortable, slightly stretched. This is why fluent people often train differently. They intentionally expose themselves to real interaction little by little, not perfectly, not dramatically, but consistently. Now imagine someone sending short voice messages every day in English. At first, it feels awkward, embarrassing even. But after weeks of repetition, something changes. The brain becomes less reactive emotionally. Speaking starts feeling more normal. This is how adaptation works. Now here's another important truth. Many learners try to sound perfect too early. And honestly, perfectionism destroys fluency faster than mistakes do, because perfectionism creates hesitation, overthinking, fear, and fear slows communication dramatically. Now think about children learning their native language again. Children say incomplete sentences constantly, wrong grammar, wrong pronunciation, and still, communication develops naturally through interaction. Adults often refuse themselves this same freedom. They expect advanced performance immediately. And that unrealistic expectation creates emotional pressure. Now, here's something powerful fluent learners eventually understand. Communication is not performance. It is connection. That mindset changes everything emotionally, because once communication becomes about sharing meaning instead of avoiding mistakes, the brain relaxes, and relaxed brains communicate much better naturally. Now let's talk about listening for a moment. Many learners practice listening passively only. They hear English, but never react to it, never answer, never imitate, never participate mentally. But fluent people often interact with listening actively. They predict responses, shadow phrases, pause and answer questions aloud, react emotionally. This active involvement trains the brain for participation instead of observation. And honestly, that difference becomes huge over time. Now imagine listening to a podcast. One learner simply hears the words passively. Another learner pauses and answers mentally. What would I say here? The second learner is training conversation reflexes. That's powerful. Now here's another hidden issue. Many learners study English only when motivation appears. But motivation is unstable emotionally. Some days you feel inspired. Other days you feel tired, insecure, or distracted. Fluent people usually build systems instead of depending entirely on feelings. Small, consistent exposure, daily interaction, regular listening, regular speaking. And over time, these habits create automatic progress. Now, honestly, this is why some learners improve slowly for years while others suddenly accelerate. The difference is often not intelligence. It is training style. One learner keeps feeding passive recognition only. The other trains communication itself, and communication training changes the nervous system gradually. Now think about this deeply. The brain becomes calmer around situations it experiences repeatedly. At first, conversations feel stressful because they are unfamiliar emotionally. But after enough exposure, the brain slowly stops treating English interaction like danger. And once fear decreases, fluency increases naturally. That's why real progress often feels emotional before it feels linguistic. Now here's one final thought before we continue. Many learners are not bad at English. They are simply trapped inside training systems that never prepared them for real-life communication. And honestly, once people finally understand this, their entire learning journey can change. Because now they stop asking, how do I memorize more English? And start asking, how do I train my brain for real communication? That question changes everything. One of the biggest misunderstandings about fluency is this. People think fluent speakers speak without fear, but honestly, that's not true. Most fluent speakers simply learned how to continue speaking even when small moments of discomfort appear. Hello again, my amazing students. And let's continue. Speaking anxiety is extremely common among English learners. Even learners with strong vocabulary sometimes freeze during conversations. And honestly, this confuses many people because internally they think, if I already know the words, why can't I speak naturally? The answer is emotional, not only linguistic, because conversations happen under pressure, real-time pressure, and pressure changes how the brain functions. Now imagine someone asking you a question suddenly in English. Your brain immediately begins doing many things at once: listening, understanding, thinking, translating, planning a response, monitoring mistakes, judging yourself emotionally, all in seconds. That's mentally exhausting, especially if your brain still associates English conversations with danger or embarrassment. Now, here's something important. Fluent people usually think differently during conversations, not because they are smarter, but because they stopped trying to control every sentence perfectly. That changes everything emotionally. Many learners try to build perfect sentences before speaking, but during real conversations, this creates delay and panic. Meanwhile, fluent communicators often prioritize flow over perfection. They continue moving, continue reacting, continue expressing ideas even imperfectly. And honestly, this relaxed momentum sounds much more natural. Now think about native speakers. Do native speakers always speak perfectly? Of course not. They pause, restart sentences, forget words, change direction mid-conversation. But they continue communicating comfortably because mistakes do not emotionally shock them. That emotional comfort is extremely important. Now let's talk about reaction training, because this is one of the most powerful ways to retrain the brain for fluency. Most learners train English slowly. They read, think, translate, analyze. But conversations move quickly. So the brain needs faster automatic reactions. Now imagine hearing a simple question. What did you do today? Many learners freeze because they begin mentally searching through grammar rules and translations. But fluent speakers usually react automatically through patterns, not deep analysis. That automaticity comes from repeated exposure and reaction practice. Now here's something interesting. The brain loves efficiency. If you repeatedly train fast, simple responses, the brain slowly creates shortcuts. Communication becomes less analytical and more instinctive. This is why shadowing, spontaneous answering, and reaction exercises work so well. They train speed and emotional tolerance simultaneously. Now let's imagine a learner practicing differently. Instead of only watching English videos silently, they pause constantly and respond aloud. They imitate emotion, react to questions, repeat phrases naturally. At first, it feels strange, even uncomfortable. But after enough repetition, something powerful happens. English stops feeling like a school subject and starts feeling like a communication tool. That transition is huge. Now, honestly, many learners underestimate how emotional speaking really is. People often think fluency is only knowledge, but communication is deeply connected to emotional regulation too. If panic increases, fluency decreases. If calmness increases, fluency often improves naturally. This is why confidence and fluency are so connected. Now think about this carefully. A learner may know advanced grammar perfectly, but still struggle socially because fear interrupts retrieval. Meanwhile, another learner with simpler English may sound more fluent because they stay relaxed enough to keep communicating. That's powerful. Now let's go deeper into mistakes again. Many learners experience one awkward conversation and emotionally treat it like disaster. But fluent speakers usually experience awkward moments too. The difference is interpretation. Fluent people think, that was a weird moment. Insecure learners think, I'm terrible at English. Same event, different emotional impact. Now imagine training your brain differently. Instead of fearing pauses, you begin accepting them. Instead of fearing mistakes, you expect them naturally. Instead of trying to sound perfect, you focus on staying connected and expressive. That mindset creates enormous emotional freedom. And honestly, emotional freedom is one of the hidden secrets behind natural communication. Now, here's another important truth. Real conversations are not language exams. People are usually not analyzing your grammar constantly. Most people simply want to understand you. And once learners truly understand this emotionally, conversations become less frightening. Now let's talk about thinking in English. Many learners obsess over this idea. But honestly, thinking in English naturally often develops after enough exposure and interaction, not through force. The brain slowly adapts when communication becomes frequent enough. At first, learners translate internally constantly. Then slowly, certain phrases become automatic. Then reactions become faster. Then entire moments happen directly in English without conscious translation. This process feels gradual and almost invisible while it's happening, but over time, it changes fluency dramatically. Now imagine someone practicing communication daily for several months. At first, fear, hesitation, translation, mental pressure, but little by little, faster reactions, more comfort, less panic, more flow. That transformation is not magic. It is nervous system adaptation. Now here's another hidden secret fluent people understand. They continue conversations even when they don't understand everything perfectly. Many learners panic the moment one sentence becomes unclear. But fluent communicators stay calm. They ask questions, guess from context, continue interacting. That flexibility keeps communication alive. And honestly, flexibility matters much more than perfection in real conversations. Now let's go deeper one final time before the next section. Your brain becomes fluent through survival and repetition, not through hiding from communication. Every real interaction teaches the brain, you survived, you communicated, you handled it. And little by little, English stops feeling like danger. Once that happens, fluency begins accelerating naturally. For a long time, many learners believe something painful about themselves. I'm just bad at English. And honestly, after enough frustration, enough awkward conversations, enough failed speaking attempts, that belief starts feeling real. Hello, one last time, my amazing students. And let's finish this together. But maybe the problem was never your intelligence. Maybe the problem was never your potential. Maybe you were simply training in a way that never prepared your brain for real communication. That changes everything emotionally, because suddenly your struggles stop meaning, I can't learn English, and start meaning, my training needs to change. That realization creates hope again. Now think about this carefully. If someone spends years training passive understanding only, of course, real conversations will feel difficult. That does not mean the person is incapable. It simply means the brain adapted to the environment it practiced most often. And honestly, brains are extremely adaptable, much more adaptable than people realize. Now imagine changing your learning system completely, not abandoning grammar or vocabulary entirely, but reorganizing priorities, more listening with emotional attention, more speaking aloud, more reaction training, more communication practice, more exposure to natural English, less perfectionism, less fear, less silent studying only. Over time, your brain would begin changing too, not instantly, but gradually, naturally. Now here's something important. Fluency is not built through one giant breakthrough moment. It is built through many small repetitions that slowly retrain the nervous system. Every voice message, every conversation, every listening session, every awkward moment survived successfully. All these small experiences quietly teach the brain, English is safe. Communication is possible. You can continue. That emotional retraining matters deeply. Because honestly, many learners are fighting fear more than language itself. Now think about how different your English journey feels emotionally once fear decreases. Conversations become lighter. Listening becomes calmer. Mistakes stop feeling catastrophic. And suddenly, learning becomes more enjoyable instead of exhausting. That emotional shift changes consistency dramatically. Now let's talk about confidence one final time. Confidence is not something people magically receive before speaking. Confidence grows through repeated evidence. The brain slowly gathers proof. I handled that conversation. I understood more this time. I recovered after forgetting a word. I survived the awkward silence. And little by little, communication stops feeling dangerous. Now imagine your future self 6 months from now if you train differently every day. Not perfectly, just differently. More active communication, more interaction, more reaction, more comfort with imperfection. How different could your fluency feel? Honestly, probably much more than you expect. Because once the brain finally trains real communication consistently, progress often accelerates quickly. Now, here's another truth many learners need to hear. Fluent people are not necessarily people who never feel nervous. Often, they are simply people who became comfortable operating inside imperfect communication. That's a huge emotional difference. Because now the goal changes completely. Not never make mistakes, but continue communicating naturally despite mistakes. That mindset creates freedom. And honestly, freedom creates fluency much faster than fear ever could. Now let's go deeper one last time. You do not need to sound perfect to connect with people. You do not need perfect grammar to have meaningful conversations. You do not need advanced vocabulary to express personality, humor, kindness, curiosity, or emotion. Communication is much more human than many learners imagine, and once people truly understand this emotionally, they stop treating English like an exam. They begin treating it like interaction. Now think about children again for one moment. Children become fluent because they interact constantly without obsessing over perfection. They experiment, react, repeat, adjust naturally over time. Adults often interrupt this natural process with fear and overanalysis. But the brain still learns through exposure and repetition exactly the same way. That never changed. Now here's one final thought. Maybe you were never bad at English. Maybe you simply became trapped inside learning methods that trained recognition more than communication. And honestly, once you finally begin training communication directly, everything can start changing surprisingly fast because your brain is not broken. Your potential is not missing. You simply need a different kind of practice, a more human kind of practice, one built around interaction, emotion, repetition, and real communication. And one day, you may suddenly realize that the thing keeping you stuck for years was never your English itself. It was the way you were taught to train it.